As part of My Life in Film, the cinema biography of Richard Attenborough, we celebrate a career which has spanned more than 50 years in the movies, and we look at some of the influences which were to turn the young actor into the man who would direct and make such films as Oh, What a Lovely War, Young Winston, A Bridge Too Far, Chaplin, Shadowlands, and, of course, Gandhi.
Action! Go! Action! Move! Move! Move!
Dickie Attenborough was an actor, and a very respected actor. Then suddenly Dickie Attenborough became a producer. Then Dickie Attenborough became a director as well. Now he's all of those things.
No one will have to keep the British film industry going single-handed now, as he did. He and John Mills kept the whole thing going, but he, because he stayed here and made films, he didn't go to America. Others, Parker, Adrian Lyne, and Ridley Scott, all went to America. Dickie stayed.
One of the great things that he has is this insane enthusiasm. You know, he's teased a lot for his Dickie and hugging and all that business, but that's not fraudulent with him. It's part of his soul.
On the film soundtrack, you will hear sobbing. And people think it's me crying. It's not. It's Richard kneeling by the camera, sobbing his heart out. I think that about sums it up, really.
People say to me, what do you do? And I say, well, part of what I do is I go to America with Richard Attenborough and I ask people to give us $20, $30, $40 million. I mean, it's crackers.
There are 3 or 4 Richard Attenboroughs which at times get out. There's the executive Richard Attenborough, he's very smart. There's the actor, and that's because he understands other people. There's the director, because he really does want to get things going. He can be impatient, and that's no bad thing. And there is also the humanitarian aspect of Richard Attenborough, which I would say transcends all of his other many qualities.
He's a crusader. He's a mild crusader. Sometimes he's a passionate crusader for rights, human rights, justice, freedom, liberty.
Tonight, this is your life, Dickie Attenborough.
More before we close?
Look here, miss. Judging by all I've had tonight, I ought to be drunk, see? I want to be drunk. I want to be drunk more than I've ever wanted anything in my whole life. Who says sailors don't care?
The first professional job that I had was in a film produced, directed, written, everything else, by Noel Coward. Coward was not only a great hero, but became a major figure in my life and Sheila's life, and I shall ever be grateful to him for casting me in Which We Serve.
Play another tune, for God's sake. Anything's obliged.
I think he was still a student at RADA, and he turned up for the very first day of shooting, aged 19, terribly nervous.
Britain's best-loved film buff, Barry Norman.
He was ushered onto the set, and Noel Coward, the director, came over towards him, and Dickie was looking in awe at this man, and Coward came over and said, "You won't know me, my name is Noel Coward. You, of course, are Richard Attenborough." And he'd loved Noel Coward from that moment, and it was a marvellously graceful thing to do. And Dickie tells this story with great joy.
You have a sort of intuition about people, I do, and he was just an actor in that film. But I remember after the first day's work with him, I came back to Mary and said, I've just met an amazing young man called Richard Attenborough.
Longtime friend and colleague of Dickie's, Sir John Mills.
And I've seen him at action in the studio. I've seen him act. He's a very, very good young actor. But he's determined. He's so inquisitive. I'm sure he's going to do something else. And it's going to be on all sides of the camera, back and front, because I've never known anybody so inquisitive as Dickie. He was wonderfully inquisitive, just wanted to know about everything.
Best ship I ever sailed in, sir. There goes me, too, sir. Makes one feel sort of lost, doesn't it?
Very happy and a very efficient ship, sir. Thank you.
I played Shorty Blake. Kelly had been sunk. We were survivors swimming about on Carly floats in the sea, and of course the war on, so we couldn't shoot it in the sea. And so they built this terrible big tank in Dinner, which was enormous and stank. It was very filthy. And they got to about 3 weeks in it. It was absolutely hellish.
You know what I like now? Nice hot cup of tea.
I'd like a nice beer myself.
Look out! Here come the bastards back again.
Keep your heads down, get as low as you can.
Miss Butterfingers. Blimey, I spoke too soon.
Dickie played a young card. In fact, he played it 2 or 3 times, I think, after that. But he was remarkably good in it.
That piece of casting determined, in no small measure, the sort of parts that I was offered for God knows how long. I mean, for years, decades.
You can call me Pinky if you like. That's what my friends call me.
I was cursed with this idiotic, supposedly cherubic face, and I always looked years younger than I wish that was the case now, but years younger than I actually was. But this round face meant that I seemed to be, with the advent of another film called Brighton Rock, and I played Pinky, the little Brighton spiv, race gang spiv, which resulted in me either being cast as a little teenage spiv in picture after picture, or a quivering psychopath on the lower decks of Her Majesty's Navy, and they seemed to be the pinnacle of my hopes as far as an actor was concerned.
These banisters will need amending for a long while. It's a good thing we have a nice, respectable lawyer like you on the spot, who saw the accident.
I'm delighted. I'm getting out of here. I swear I've never...
Stay where you are. Frank, send for the police and the doctor. There's been an accident. Now look here, Pruitt. I only want you to say what's good for you, see? It wouldn't look good, though, would it, if I was taken up for killing and you was here?
Welcome to Variety Bandbox. Professor Howard's Casebook. At this point in our program, we invite you into the consulting room of the eminent philosopher, Professor Francis Howard, famous for his ability to delve into the minds and problems of his clients. Here he is with his beautiful secretary.
I'm expecting a client any minute. See who it is. Go on, see who it is.
Guess whom?
Guess whom? What?
He's a film star. Oh, he's lovely. He's only young, too.
Well, who is it?
It's Richard Attenborough.
It's enough. I'm the star. Now, you have a problem?
It's something I've never told a living soul, so I can tell you.
Yes. Tell me, Miss Attenborough.
Father.
Oh, God, tell me. Now, come along. Now, what is this secret?
Well, you see, I've always been cast in young parts, so
Yes.
I suppose it's because I am young.
Possibly.
But in truth, I want to do something more than that.
I understand.
I have a young face, and nobody will believe that I can play old man's parts. Nobody.
All right.
I've tried for years, but nobody will believe that I can play old man's parts, but I can. I know I can.
All right. What are you trying to do, steal the act?
I'm doing my best.
You're only supposed to be my stooge, you know. You're not supposed to be too good.
Dickie and I found ourselves in a film I had partly written called The Baby in the Battleship. And although I'd known him for many years, we weren't intimate friends at that time, but we found ourselves sharing a room in Malta.
Dickie's first partner in the film business, the writer and director, Brian Forbes.
And in the small hours of the night, we were both commiserating, saying our careers seemed to be going down cul-de-sacs as actors. And we felt that we were going nowhere, and that some of the people we had to work for weren't very good. And so with a certain arrogance, we thought, well, maybe we could do as well as they could.
I formed a company called Beaver Films with Brian Forbes, and we decided to make a film called The Angry Silence.
The first thing that drew it to my attention was a railwayman who had been sent to Coventry, i.e. none of his colleagues would speak to him. And they didn't speak to him for 3 years, even though they were on the plate with him. And he committed suicide. And it seemed a rather drastic way of ostracizing people. And The Angry Silence, which, curiously enough, passed into the language as an expression, was really an attempt, not anti-union, although it was blacked by some of the unions, and we got threatening letters and etc., when the film came out, because I think if anybody sees the film today, I was as tough on the employers as I was on the union members. And we hawked that up and down Water Street for well over a year and couldn't get ourselves arrested with it. Everybody thought, well, it's very good, but too controversial. Dickie was always the perennial optimist. I was always the pessimist. So after a year, I really thought, oh, God, we're never going to get this off. Let's move on to something else before we starve. But Dickie wouldn't give up.
Finally, I was told that we could make the film if we could raise $100,000. We could have $100,000 to make the movie. And Forbesy and I attempted to cut the movie down until finally I remember ringing him one night and saying, Forbesy, we are dotty. We really are crazy. If we cut the movie down to this extent, it'll be nothing. It won't make a decent release. We'll never get the movie shown. What we've got to do is to get everybody to make the movie for nothing. And he said, oh, Bunter. I'm afraid he calls me Bunter. He said, you're an idiot, Bunter. There's no way. And I said, I'm sure there is. We could not only go to the actors, but we must go to the crew and the lawyers and the accountants and costumiers and so on. And we eventually did this. And we got the actors virtually to work for nothing. And it wasn't until a few weeks before we actually went into production where an actor had said that he would do it and eventually said, I'm sorry, I can't afford to do it without a salary, that I had to act again because I was the only actor I knew who would work for nothing. And so that's how we made the movie. We made it for £97,000.
Shut up! Shut up, will you? You don't have to worry about not talking to me. I don't want you to talk to me, do you hear? But you stay away from my family. Just stay away from us!
Get stuffed, short ass.
And you lot. You didn't ought to talk to nobody because you got nothing to say. You're nothing. We don't need any of you.
I think it was a good partnership. I mean, apart from anything else, Dickie was learning his trade as a filmmaker then because he produced these films and Brian Forbes directed them. But they were films that had something to say about Britain at that time and said it very intelligently. And it was a time when, as I remember, British movies were mostly dominated by American money, and American studios were looking for films from Britain that would have an American appeal, especially. And I don't think Dickie and Brian Forbes were interested in that. They were trying to make films that they felt were of interest and of importance to a British public, and they went ahead and they did it.
Certainly, Angry Silence was shot almost entirely on location, as was Whistle Down the Wind, which was our second film. And that, in a sense, was part of the innovation, cinema verite, as it was conveniently called. I mean, people didn't, prior to that, shoot in the streets. We did it out of necessity, I think, more than anything else. I mean, normally, if you were shooting in Bond Street, you built Bond Street on stage 5 at Pinewood, and it looked like stage 5 at Pinewood, you know, and extras came in 2 by 2 as if they were going into the Ark, often holding hands. And I was twice arrested because there's still a law saying you can't put a tripod on the pavement in London. And so we would shoot from taxis, and the taxi would stop and I would open the door and get a shot. Things like that.
It was also around the time when working-class actors like Michael Caine were becoming popular and famous, and a lot of working-class writers were, Alan Sillitoe, for instance, were turning out that kind of life in the raw stuff. I think that it was part of a trend that they got onto there. It was not a trend that they started, but I think they... exploit is not quite the right word, but I think they used that trend very well in those films.
When Mary Haley Bell wrote Whistle Down the Wind, she actually wrote it in a sort of, not upper middle class, but probably, yes, certainly middle class background. It wasn't, in fact, set in Yorkshire, on the Yorkshire moors, and in a broken-down farm. But that was essentially Forbes's idea, and it was a brilliant concept because suddenly we put on the screen a world which half the UK had never seen, let alone the rest of the world.
It was a very delicate line I had to tread, really, of children thinking that a murderer was Christ. And to make that believable, Haley goes to the barn one night and there's a man who says it, and he says it as an oath, because she says, "Who are you?" And as an oath, he says, "Jesus Christ." And she believes him from that point, except the little boy finally becomes disillusioned with one memorable line, you know, when he says, "That's not Jesus, that's just a fella."
Will you tell us a story, please?
Story?
Yes, please.
What of that?
The Good Samaritan. No, doves and fishes. No, the Holy Ghost. Go on, will you? Yes, tell us a story. Go on, will you tell us a story? Yes, please tell us a story. Story, 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 story.
For X number of years, I found acting and producing absolutely satisfying. I was happy as a sandboy. I was fortunate to work and support my family, and I couldn't have asked for more. But gradually I came to feel that, exciting though the acting was, it was essentially interpretive. It didn't carry a signature in any sense. And if you did have a cri de coeur of some kind, it was only by chance that you could do it if you were an actor. I made a film, played in a film called 10 Rillington Place, which was a cry against a right-wing move in House of Commons to bring back the death penalty. And opposing the death penalty, I was able to make a statement by playing in that movie.
10 Rillington Place, home of the multiple murderer John Reginald Christie, is finally demolished. Richard Attenborough, who played the killer in the chilling, controversial film of the same name, tells how he came to terms with the mind of Christie.
I saw documentary material, I read everything that existed, I went to Madame Tussauds and so on, and all the Chamber of Horrors and all that stuff in relation to Christie. I looked at actual photographs and films, I spoke to people who'd arrested him and so on. And it was Christie's voice that I first determined. Christie was a demented man. He was a totally unfulfilled human being. And so I started with a feeling of sympathy for him. Circumstances, inheritance, whatever it was, had created this human being who couldn't help himself. And I wanted in this voice, this rather gentle, quiet voice, I just wanted to find a feeling of people not initially saying, "My God, what a ghastly, terrifying character that is," but what an extraordinary man that is. And the combination of that concern and the voice started to help me create this obscene figure.
I think one of the things that finally forced Dickie to take the leap into being a director was the sort of social conscience that came around in films like The Angry Silence, which he had produced, of course.
Film critic and author of a book about Dickie Attenborough, Andy Dugan.
There's a sort of feeling that he wanted to express himself, and more particularly, he wanted to express himself in the values that had been instilled in him from a very, very early age by his own parents.
I come from a radical family. My father was a forbidding character. He was principal of Leicester University College, an academic with very certain principles. He was a very early member of the Labour Party. In fact, he met my mother at a suffragette meeting, I think, where somebody tried to push my mother, who he'd never met, around, and he leapt up and clonked the bloke on the jaw, from all I can gather. But they lived a life of community responsibility. We rarely went on holiday without taking one or two boys from Leicester with us for X number of weeks, boys who would never ever have seen the sea, had it not for the fact that, and as my parents said, we can't go for 5 weeks, we go to 4 weeks, but we will take these two boys with us. And both she and my father brought a mass of Jewish refugees out of Germany, and in particular 2 girls who were on their way to America to live with their uncle when war broke out. And so my mother and father adopted them in emotional terms, not legally. And so my brothers and I had 2 German Jewish sisters throughout the entire war. And so they affected my values. I might, if I'd had the chance, and if I'd been to university, a fact that I regret very much that I didn't, I might, if I'd been to university, have felt capable of writing, or maybe even going into politics. But I didn't. And therefore, because of this feeling of wanting to say something, either by advocacy or by opposition, I decided that the way that I might be able to do it was through producing and directing movies. And the first movie that really excited me in those terms, although it took all those years to make, was Gandhi. Reading the biography of Gandhi. This man stood for and stated unequivocally so many of the principles which I thought were right and admirable and so on. And so I started my directing and producing concept with that film. In fact, many other films came in between because I couldn't mount that one.
The final breakthrough in that sort of chain of being an actor, producer, and then finally being a director came when he got the invitation from his very good friend John Mills to direct Oh, What a Lovely War.
Oh, we don't want to lose you, but we think you ought to go. For your king and your country both need you so. We shall want you and miss you, but with all our might and main.
Where his genius came in was, I think, with the music. He just handled it absolutely superbly. It's a great track, and they had a terrific feeling of period, didn't they? Especially that Maggie Smith number, that ghastly makeup, and she's shot in close-up. No, wonderful shot.
The Army and the Navy need attention. The outlook isn't healthy, you'll admit. But I've a perfect dream of a new recruiting scheme, which I think is absolutely it. If only other girls would do as I do, I believe that we could manage it alone. But I turn all suitors from me, but the sailor and the Tommy. I've an army and a navy of my own. On Sunday, I'd walk out with the soldier. Monday, I'm taken by a tar. Tuesday, I'm out with a baby Boy Scout. On Wednesday, huzzah! On Thursday, I gang out with a Scotty. On Friday, the captain of the crew. But on Saturday, I'm willing, if you'll only take the shilling, to make a man of any one of you.
I thought it was a most marvellously innovative film. I can think now, and images of it keep running through my mind. I mean, all the people playing leapfrog, the officers playing leapfrog, for instance. I mean, I can still see that very, very clearly. And it is a film which I can look at time and again and always find something new in it. And I thought it was very fresh, very invigorating. And beneath all that, of course, it was very, very bitter indictment of war in general and the First World War in particular.
Some people just did not like it. I remember going up to my golf club and several of the members said, "What the hell does this man, your friend, think he's up to doing this?" They didn't like it. And it was too outspoken for them. But I think it's one of those things that needed to be said, and he said it.
I found gradually, starting with What a Lovely War, that here was an opportunity, because I understood drama, because I understood acting, because I loved imagery, because I found the medium of cinema so exciting. I found that I could marry all those things with an ability to be able to make a statement, to be able to say, that's what I believe.
What kind of a director Dickie became, and some of the fine films he made, we'll discover in part 2 of My Life in Film next week.
If I had not become an actor, and if I had had the skills, I would love to have been a musician of some kind. Music affects my life. I listen to music all the time. And so music, right from the very word go, has always been part of my concept of cinema. It's not an afterthought or something which is added. It is integral. How ridiculous that we listen to great emotional scenes and there's a violin and a flute playing. I mean, but we totally accept it. It is part of that mosaic, as it were. And I had the great good fortune, through my son Michael, who'd worked with him in the theatre, of meeting George Fenton. And George, as no other composer I've ever worked with, he has no ego in relation to his music in isolation. His music is, as every other element in the makeup of cinema, a part of it. That sort of Gregorian chant at the beginning in the chapel of Shadowlands, nobody believes that it's not a period piece of music. Everybody assumes it's Fenton. It's absolute Fenton.
I don't think there's anybody else that I could have written it for, because he believes that I'm going to write it. You know what I mean? He's not sitting there thinking, is he or isn't he? He actually believes that I can write this thing that he wants. And he is an absolute expert at that. And I've seen that with actors. He has such expectations of them that the child in all of them responds.
He has a knack of getting the best out of actors without seeming to do very much about it. We're all very nervous people, and we always think we're pretty poor at times, and he just does the right thing and says the right thing at the right moment.
Sir John Mills, who's played in several of Dickie's films, including Young Winston.
You see that? I've lost the end of that finger. I got shut in a taxi door, and if you lose even that little tiny part of you, it becomes a big drama. You think, going to spoil your acting career. And the first shot of Winston, Dickie said, "Now, Johnny, I want you to hold up this book in close-up, right? And then they'll track back from the book, and then we discover your face." And, of course, the hands had to be on that side of the book, and this finger showed. And I didn't say anything. He saw me trying to hold it. He said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, actually, I've got no top of a finger." Well, he was so wonderful about it. It wasn't an easy thing to handle. It sounds silly, but it was quite a big moment. The first damn shot, here I am with two hands in big close-up on a wide screen with no top of my finger. He did fiddle somehow or other. I put the hand behind the book and had one holding it, and he was just wonderful about it.
That was the first big film I'd ever been in.
Simon Ward, who played young Winston.
And it was a very curious experience to find myself in Wales, surrounded by this enormous crew and helicopters and trains and bulldozers and lots of extras. And more than anything else, surrounded by driving rain. So I'm sort of able to sit around worrying more and more, and I am a sort of consummate worrier and sort of world-class worrier. And then when I did come to work, it was not in a way that, of course, I'd ever worked at before, because this wasn't acting. This was running and jumping and fighting. And there again, Dickie was just marvellous in helping me through what was a major crisis of confidence.
Quiet now! So empty. Now this goes on a long time, so stand still.
Settle down, so nobody has to move.
Come on.
So ready? 4:39, take one.
I'd create an atmosphere on the floor whereby everybody concerned knows that their principal function is to serve that actor or actress, and that they should help, because actors and actresses in the main respond to audiences, that they must be the unheard audience on that set, and that the principal person in that audience will be me, the director.
He never shouts on film sets. Well, that's not true. He very rarely shouts on film sets, and he only ever does it for effect.
Dickie's business partner, Diana Hawkins.
Sometimes, if an actor can't get it right and is doing take after take after take, to break the atmosphere and change the pattern, he will very rarely pretend that there's a member of the crew doing something wrong and have a great big shout and scream. And so he's not blaming the actor. He's broken that chain of, oh my God, I'm going to fluff it yet again.
Somehow or another, you convince them that they are the only actor and actress who could possibly be playing that part. And because they're the only actor or actress, they are capable of giving a performance the like of which they've never touched before. Now, if you can do that, if you can create this atmosphere, if you can make them believe that that is the circumstance in which they find themselves, they like onion skins, their techniques and so on, and the tricks that they've employed under certain circumstances in the past just float away. And the absolute truth and reality of what they are doing comes out. And because it's the truth, they venture, they dare, they do things they've never done before. And of course it becomes magical. And if I have a skill in cinema, that is what I can do. And casting is the first step of that whole process.
When his casting director saw Simon Ward, he was playing, I think, a hippie on stage at the Haymarket Theatre. Now, you're never going to look at that man and say, yes, this is the man who said, we shall fight them on the beaches, blah, blah, blah. But he came out, he tested 3 times. And the one thing that Simon didn't know in all of these tests was that Carl Foreman, the producer, didn't want him. He wanted someone else. I don't know who, but I think he really wanted someone else, anyone but Simon Ward. But Dickie had faith in him because he knew that this was a young, energetic actor who could carry off the boys' own stuff, at the Battle of Omdurman and the Boer War and all that sort of stuff. But The great scene in Young Winston is the maiden speech, which is the first time you get, like, the shadow of the man. You know, you get this notion that this is a man who would grow into a great figure. And that was partly, I suppose, because Dickie saw the resemblance that nobody else did. And also, I think, because Simon grew into the part. He became aware, and I think he probably shifted his body language and just changed the intonation slightly. But no one in a million years would have thought of Simon Ward for Young Winston. But he did, and it was a great performance.
I think his skill in casting comes because of his care and sympathy. He's able to see beneath and beyond, I think, and something into the future of possibilities. That he's the only film director I know who makes a huge point of greeting everyone on the set. If you've got about, if you've got, say, 3,000 extras in the background, and then an actor appears for maybe only doing a part for 2 or 3 days, not many directors actually do take the trouble to introduce them to everyone on the set and make them feel that they're not, that they haven't just, that they're not just an extra, they haven't just turned up. He makes everyone feel at home and welcome and secure.
Richard Attenborough is a very different person to work for than most other people, because he is a great believer in the fact that in order to make a successful picture, it has to be a successful social experiment. He wants people to know people. He likes the family of his crew and the cast and everything else. He wants everybody to be part of that process. He shows enormous respect to everybody, which may not be genuine, but he's very convincing.
Right, stand by for rehearsal.
David, in terms of for what it's worth, the drum roll should start assume he's appeared in the doorway.
It is a cooperative art form, I believe. And so that when, as I have now, a group of friends and colleagues who I've worked with over and over and over again, when we come together, nobody's fighting for a benchmark, for a yardstick of their position, etc. They all have the same image in front of them of the entity that eventually we will present.
What are we waiting for, David? Come on, answer me, darling. Just answer me, sweetheart. Don't complain all the time. Just tell me, darling. Well, just tell me what the matter is.
It's a very hard job being a film director. Now, you get a good table at the Caprice, and people write about you, and you make lots of money if the movie's a hit, and a little less money if the movie's a flop, the way things are today.
William Goldman, the legendary screenwriter who worked with Dickie on A Bridge Too Far.
Michael Caine once said a great thing. He said, "I act for nothing. I do not get paid for acting. I get paid a great deal of money for waiting." And people who don't know what a soundstage is like or what a movie set is like, it's agonizingly dull because it's very mechanical, and there's tremendous pressure. And there's tremendous money being wasted every minute when you're not shooting. And it takes a great deal of time for everything to be set up and lit properly. And the director has to deal with all of the problems that he's pestered with in that time. He may also be pestered with cranky stars. Everyone's at the mercy of a cranky star. He's always pestered by the studio because he's always over budget. All of those things, and the fact that he's had no sleep, that he's very often not at home, that he certainly is not getting what he wants, just as writers never write what they really want, directors never really get the shot they want. And so this goes on and on and on, and everybody else, you see, is worried about their own discipline. The costume designer is worried about the lay of the fabric, and the makeup person is worried about the eyebrows, and the cinematographer is worried about the lighting. The director has to worry about everything. I'm worried about the script. Are they saying my precious dialogue, quote, quote, as written? The director has to pay attention to everything, and at the same time, he's tired. And he also knows if he goes wildly over budget, he may never work again.
About 2 hours ago, Supreme Headquarters gave the news of our airborne landing in Holland in this brief announcement. Strong forces of the 1st Allied Airborne Army were landed in Holland this afternoon. That's all the official news so far. The Germans say that landings were made by paratroops followed by gliders.
The biggest pressure on Dickie Attenborough's early career as a director was undoubtedly On a Bridge Too Far. You have to remember, the budget was about $23 million. It was the most expensive movie ever made. It was the Titanic of its day. It had 15 major stars. It had Robert Redford, it had James Caan, it had Anthony Hopkins, it had Sean Connery, Gene Hackman. There were 15 big names. And a film that was essentially about a loss. It was one of the major Allied disasters of the last war, so there was going to be no happy ending.
Gentlemen, this is a story that you will tell your grandchildren, and mightily bored they'll be. The plan is called Operation Market Garden. Market is the airborne element, and Garden the ground forces. That's us. Now, this is our position on the Belgian border here. Tomorrow, 3 airborne divisions will begin landing in Holland. The American 101st here, around Eindhoven. The American 82nd here, south of Nijmegen, and our own 1st Airborne boys, and a Polish brigade here at Arnhem. 64 miles behind enemy lines. Now their job is to take and hold all the bridges in these 3 areas. Our job is to punch a hole through the German front line here, and then drive like hell up this road, linking up with each airborne division on the way. Speed is the vital factor. The plan is to reach Eindhoven in 2 to 3 hours and Arnhem in 2 to 3 days. That, gentlemen, is the prize. The bridge over the Rhine. The last bridge between us and Germany. Kick-off will be at 14:35 hours tomorrow afternoon.
The principal problem on the bridge was time. Because bridges are an essential part of the communication in Holland, to close a bridge was a major operation.
The $1 Million Hour has passed into movie legend. It was a phrase coined by William Goldman in his marvellous book Adventures in the Screen Trade. And basically they had the bridge at Nijmegen for 3 consecutive Sundays. And they had it for an hour on each of those 3 Sundays. And as David Tomlin, the assistant director, said, trying to close the Nijmegen Bridge is like trying to close the M1 on a weekend. It's just chaos. But it had taken them, I think, the better part of 6 months to negotiate these 3 hours of shooting. And it came to the big scene. It's the scene on the bridge. There are tanks on the bridge. Redford's men have to go on and sort of clear the bridge so that Colonel Frost's men can stand a chance, etc., etc., etc. And there were all sorts of pressures. Redford, for example, was due to be paid off on the Wednesday. Now, if they had not got that in that hour, he would have then gone on to penalty payments if he had to stay another week. And the penalty payments for the 4 days would have been more than the $2 million he was getting for the film anyway. And there was no guarantee they would get the bridge again the following week, because having taken 6 months to get it for 3 Sundays, they couldn't very well turn around to the Dutch and say, can we have it again next week?
It was just an insane thing, and the weather was bad. And the pressure kept mounting because it didn't look like we were going to get it. And I remember watching Attenborough walking around in these mystic circles. I'm sure they were in his head somehow, childhood bringing him luck, and whistling. I wish I could remember what he was whistling.
Then in the midst of all this, there's this kind of surreal episode with the corpses. You know, when he notices that the bodies have got their eyes open, and he suddenly has to turn around and say, would all the corpses kindly keep their eyes closed? Which... It beggars belief. It's like something out of a film by Buñuel.
The weather cleared enough that we could shoot, and we got the hour, and we got out of it. But that pressure was so much because Joseph E. Levine, now dead, the great producer of that movie, was unique in Hollywood and in international film in that he produced films with his own money. And he was rich, but no one's that rich.
Marky Vaughan, Deacon Alpha, I read you loud and clear. You are downwind, and you will be clear for drop on your coast. Over. Marky Vaughan, Deacon Alpha, you are clear for drop.
I hope it is a terrifying indictment of war. By that, I do not mean for 1 second that it does not show in evidence the courage, the comradeship, and the extraordinary spirit that imbued the men. But I hope it also shows some of the stupidities, some of the extraordinary incompetencies resulting, inevitably, in the most ghastly waste.
With A Bridge Too Far, Dickie Attenborough had made exactly the sort of war film you would expect him to make. It was a very moral film. It was very far away from one which depended on phony heroics. There was no happy ending. And it was one which really relates to those values which he was taught by his parents. But whatever kind of film he made, it was a carrot dangled by Joe Levine, a very wily old producer, against the promise of money for the film that Dickie Attenborough had always had his heart set on making, the film for which he became a director in the first place, Gandhi.
And the remarkable tale of how that Oscar-winning film was made is told in part 3 of My Life in Film next week. The programmes are a Just Radio production. Part 3 of My Life in Film, the cinema biography of Richard Attenborough, we reach what was in many ways the greatest triumph of his whole career. After years of trying to raise the money for his film Gandhi, the movie hit the jackpot in 1982 and collected a whole mantel shelf of Oscars.
Richard Attenborough for Gandhi.
Hear the wave of excitement as it sweeps the hall, but Richard Attenborough's remarkable achievement.
Have you heard the news? Well, we won 8. Bleeding hell, 8!
His fascination with the Mahatma began in 1963. He decided to become a film director. In the meantime, he continued to work as an actor and producer.
It's the second year running that a British film has taken the Best Film Oscar. Gandhi took another 7 as well, including Best Director for Sir Richard and Best Actor for Ben Kingsley. And as Brian Barron reports, the celebrations were in true Hollywood style.
Above all, it was Gandhi's night, sweeping the board with 8 Oscars, more than any foreign film has ever won. And amid the ballyhoo and cheesecake, the Best Actor himself seemed extremely restrained.
Do you remember when I interviewed you in New York and I told you how sexy I thought you were in Gandhi, and you said that you liked that very much? That was another dimension to the picture. You feeling sexy tonight?
Would you like me to answer that now, or shall we talk about it later?
Any effect on our political leaders?
Well, I don't know, madam. I just pray it might. One of our political leaders at home said to me in a letter that the 3 hours of the film had achieved more than he'd achieved in 50 years of politics.
He is an incurable optimist, absolutely, totally optimistic about anything.
Terry Clegg, who regularly works with Dickie Attenborough and was in charge of production on Gandhi.
Even in the most adverse circumstances, Dickie will not give up hope that something can be achieved, which is exactly how he came eventually, after 19 years, to make Gandhi, because he would not give it up. He knew it was an important movie, it was the love of his life to make, and he was going to make it.
I always remember going to one of the big American distribution companies and asking yet again for the 400th time for some money to make this movie. And I thought I had just told the most fetching and captivating story that would make this magnificent film. And I came to a halt at the end, and the person on the other side of the desk said, "Diggy, who the hell do you think's interested in a little brown man dressed in a sheet carrying a bean pole?" And that made me 1,000 times more anxious, obviously, to make the movie.
In terms of the type of films he makes and the type of subject matter he chooses, I think, for the most part, the films are very noble and honourable.
Longtime friend of Dickie and fellow movie producer David, now Lord Putnam.
I think the thing that binds us as friends and as colleagues is that we both see film as part and parcel of a push in the direction of the type of world we'd like to find ourselves, the type of world we'd like to live in. And Dick is terrific at that. I think he has a very clear vision of the kind of world he wants to live in. It's a vision derived from his parents, many of the things he stood for over the years. And, of course, it's in his films, and the films, to an extent, have been very effective in promoting that vision.
I was given the Louis Fisher biography of Mahatma Gandhi, and I started to read this book. And I think it was certainly within the first 20-odd pages, I came across an incident where he was walking along the pavement in South Africa with an Indian colleague, and coming towards him were two white people. And as was expected, he stepped into the gutter. He didn't make a fuss. That was what you did if you were an Indian in South Africa at that time. And having gone by, he turned to his colleague and he said, "You know, it is always a mystery to me that men should feel themselves honoured by the humiliation of their fellow human beings." Now, I think he was in his late teens, and I can't even repeat the line now without sort of getting shivers down my back. It seemed to me the most extraordinary, succinct summary of an attitude. So that sort of fired me to start with. I obviously disliked colonialism and imperialism, but it was more than that. It was the supreme, simplistic honesty of this man.
I turned the movie down about 3 times. He kept coming to me with one script after another saying, you know, well, we're going to make this movie, I want you to do it. And I always said, no, I'm sorry, Dick, I just don't fancy India. I had been to India, in fact. I went there with Fred Zinnemann on a recce once, and I was so horrified by what I'd seen in Calcutta, I thought, I never want to set foot here again. He then played a very clever move on me. He sent me a script. He said, I know you don't want to do the movie, he said, but this is a script written by somebody called Jack Brierley, and it's such a good script. I would really appreciate your thoughts and your comments, and maybe you can give us a little bit of help about how we should set this up. Well, once I read the script, I was knocked out. I thought, this is probably the best script I've ever read. My wife read it, and she knew what it meant for her. She said, it doesn't matter if it's going to be 12 months of absolute misery, you've got to do this movie because it's a once-in-a-lifetime movie. And she was absolutely right, and I did the movie, and there you go.
He phoned me one day, and he said, I want to meet you for lunch. I want to talk to you about something. I thought, goodness knows what.
One of Dickie's favourite actors, Sir Anthony Hopkins.
We went for lunch somewhere, and he breezed into this restaurant. And, he does tend to call everyone darling and dearie and sweetie and all that stuff. He says, darling, he said, I want you to play Gandhi. Well, I looked over my shoulder. I thought he was talking to somebody behind me. I said, Gandhi? He said, yes. He said, I want you to play Gandhi. I remember phoning my father. He said, well, it's going to be a comedy. He said, don't be so silly. He said, who's going to play Pandit Nehru? Harry Seacombe? And, but Attenborough persisted in this. He said that I could play it. And I went along with it. I'm vanity, ego, whatever. I went along. I thought, well, maybe he's right. I didn't know. I found it very odd. Here I'm a blue-eyed Welshman and built like a rugby forward. Anyway, one day in 1978, I went down to Mexico to a health farm, and I was trying, get into shape because the film was coming up soon. Ran up the sides and down the sides of mountains. I was living on bean shoots. I looked like hell in the end, and I was feeling quite ill. I remember looking in the mirror one day, I thought, this is impossible, absolutely impossible. So I had to phone him. I said, Richard, it's impossible. I can't play Gandhi. I'd do your film a great disservice. I don't know why he got this bee in his bonnet about me doing it. I'm very flattered that he did, but I think he must have had a screw loose at the time. But I'm very, I look back and I can have a laugh now, and I'm sure it would have been a nightmare. And a few months later, he found Ben Kingsley. The fact is that I am a lot bigger than he was. I'm considerably taller and would never be that thin because my bone structure is quite wrong. And I still have all my teeth. There was one actor, I believe, who was willing to remove all his teeth for the part. But you have to get, it's impressionist painting, really, that you're doing. You have to get the impression of the man. To allow myself to believe what Richard was always saying, as soon as you walk onto the screen, that's him. They're not going to sit there with photographs and say, oh, I think his knees are bigger, you know. So I simply went on the easiest, the most gormless of diets. I just ate no carbohydrates. And I lost weight. It just dropped off me. Yoga, yes, I did yoga because it's a great discipline. It was a tool to help express certain aspects of the character, as was learning to spin. I think I could spin for 7 minutes without snapping the thread, which is not great shakes, but I mean, I did. But it was quite daunting, I have to say.
Action! Action!
Moment of splendid stillness and grief was when I am simply walking across a piece of earth. In the previous scene, hundreds of people have been shot to death on the same piece of earth. All I have to do is walk across and think about the situation. Do not need to do a grief-stricken walk. I do not need to pull a grief-stricken face. And this is where Richard is such a wonderful director, because he is interested in filming behaviour. He is not interested in filming acting.
I love the scale of cinema. It's one of the things that I believe that television is totally, with all its magic, incapable of conveying. And to be able to put Lutyens and those millions of people on the screen was magical. But I don't honestly think that without Ben's performance, or without the examination of Gandhi, that they would have been worth doing in themselves.
I think the crowd's out in a camel train and 2 or 3 men with the camels.
Take this saddle off. Take it off. Yeah, take it right off. Is he actually understanding what we're saying?
Yes. You haven't cleaned your teeth for a week. Is this what we pay you about a couple of £1,000 a week for washing the elephant's bum?
There's nowhere quite like India, and for all the squalor and the horror that you see almost around every corner, there's a majesty about it that is, you just don't see anywhere else. But it's a very, very difficult place to make a movie, mainly because everything that is done in India is done on paper. You cannot go to the head of any organisation and cut out all the underlying people. I had to have a production manager whose sole responsibility was dealing with Indian railways. And that meant dealing with hundreds of civil servants who would not be denied. They had to have their little stamp on the piece of paper, otherwise you did not move on to the next department.
And most important for tomorrow is everyone's got to bring their mothers, their fathers, their brothers. We don't want anyone in the family left at home.
Come on, ladies, quick, quick, quick.
We've got another 1,000 coming. Sally, we've got another 1,000.
We started to publicise the fact that we were going to recreate Gandhiji's funeral. Historically, it was on an anniversary date of the actual funeral. We said we were going to recreate it on the Rajpath on such and such a day, and we invite you to come and participate in this event. That was obviously the key scene in the movie in terms of scale. Then we had already organised, or we had already planned, that we would actually costume and place and direct 25,000 people that we were actually, we had fingers on and we organised transport for and costumes for and so on. And we just did not know on that day whether we'd get 50,000 or however many we got. Well, on the day, we got 250,000, and it was scary. I mean, I was on the number one camera position, but when we had to get off that rostrum to go to our number 10 camera position, because we were going to go around the back of the crowd to get there, it was murder.
Round. I'd like everyone removed out.
And get rid of all this mob out of here. I don't know who they all are, you see. Now, where is Darlings?
Okay, let's say in 10 minutes we go, and it doesn't look half bad.
Shut up. We're going to now move down and start and set up in the ring. Okay, start the truck up.
Stand by.
Keep still.
Stand by. I'm turning now.
I don't think I ever remember actually losing my nerve. I lost, to my shame, my temper once. One of the reasons I felt relatively confident in terms of dealing with these massive numbers was that we rehearsed them weekend after weekend after weekend on an aerodrome, and all the people surrounding the Gurkhas, etc., surrounding the cortege itself were meticulously rehearsed, and so they were absolutely certain, no matter what happened, as to what they actually had to do. The reason I lost my temper was that we had a huge number of cameras, but we were culminating in a shot, a very high shot, up behind a tree, through which we saw the cortege coming down the Rajpath from the Lutyens buildings. And as we were in the perfect moment of shooting the proportion of the individuals against the cortege, against the soldiers, etc., through this tree, in which there were a number of people who had clambered up to watch the parade, was the most monstrously angelic little Indian boy, aged, I should think, 11, who turned full into the camera and waved. And I couldn't persuade him that wasn't, because every time I did this, waved my hand, he waved back. The entire shot was ruined. And, of course, we were never able to get it. That shot is not in the movie, because in those, now, of course, but with computers, you could have taken him out. But in those days, how many years ago is it? 15, 16 years ago was out of the question. So I'm afraid I used language to the little boy. I'm not sure that he understood, thank goodness.
Where are they going now?
Down the wrong bloody way now.
There's a bloody bus coming in there. What's that coming across the road there? What the hell's that?
I think it was 18,000 feet of film we shot that day, and probably 16,000 of it was ruined because of people looking in the camera and waving and all those things. But what was left was magical.
The most punishing schedule ever was on Gandhi.
Dickie's business partner, Diana Hawkins.
Dick was directing and producing. The locations were very often 2 hours' drive away from wherever we were staying. It meant that he had to get up usually at 4 o'clock in the morning. He would shoot until, say, an hour after darkness fell, then a 2-hour drive back to the hotel. 3 times a week, rushes would come back from England. So sometimes we would have 3 and 4 and 5 hours of rushes in a makeshift cinema in a hotel. On top of that, because Gandhi was fairly controversial in India at the time, we'd often get back to the hotel and find that the Minister for Posts and Telecommunications was asking for information because there was going to be a question in Parliament the next day, and we had to prepare information for that. Then there would be casting to do. Dick casts every single speaking part in his movie. So there would be 50 Indians sitting in a corridor waiting to be seen for 5 parts. So for 6 months, he worked 7 days a week, approximately 16, 17 hours a day. In heat, sometimes not feeling 100%, can't stop, you've got to go on, the thing has to keep rolling. And then there would be all sorts of other crises, like in the middle, when we were in a place called Pune, we woke up one morning and found that the person who was to invest the next chunk of money had changed their mind. So we had 120 crew, 50, 60 actors in the middle of India, couldn't pay the hotel bill, couldn't pay them, couldn't get them back to England. There were sort of like 5 of us who knew. Crisis meeting. What do we do? Do we tell them? People came out from England who might supply the money. We didn't tell them. It was all right in the end, but it was a pretty nightmarish week.
I found myself sitting in a theatre at Twickenham watching Gandhi.
George Fenton, who was a very young composer, was chosen by Dickie to write the music for Gandhi.
There's a shot early on in the picture where a train goes across South Africa. The camera pulls back from the train. It's a helicopter shot of the train. And I was sitting in the theatre on my own watching the film. And as soon as I saw the helicopter shot, I thought, this is it. I'm in the big time now. I'd never scored a helicopter shot. And to see this, you know, God, just a sort of the scale of the image, you know. And I came out of the theatre and he came up to me and he said, what did you think of it? Which it was, I suppose, a reasonable question, and something now, at my age now, I'd probably expect someone to say, but somehow it was so inappropriate to me then. I was just gobsmacked, and he said, well, you'll have to come to India, is that all right, and meet Ravi Shankar. I said, fine, whatever. So literally within about 5 days, I was on a plane with him to India. And I literally at that stage couldn't believe it was happening to me, really. The problems of using Indian music in films, and particularly with a subject like Gandhi, was that you cannot just use an Indian instrument as a colour. You cannot just use an Indian rag as a bit of underscore, because in many cases it's sacred music, for one thing. Certain instruments represent certain things, etc., etc., etc. So it was complicated. And we had a band of Indian musicians travel to London to play, and these are all people that Ravi Shankar wanted to bring with him, etc. None of them had been to London before. It was snowing. None of them had seen snow before. It was so bizarre, the whole thing. And we had a rehearsal, because also they read Indian notation, but they don't read the same way that our musicians do. And we had to put them all in the studio at the same time and record. So I said to Dickie, this could all go horribly wrong. And he said, well, if it goes wrong, he said, we'll think again and you'll do it again. Well, that in itself is such an unusual kind of approach, because when you go to work on a film, you're generally given one chance. And if you don't get it right, or if you don't get it right to the satisfaction of the filmmaker, they're going to say, well, thank you very much, goodbye, and get someone else. I never forget that he is not some commercially orientated filmmaker skating around on the surface looking for a hit to make. He only makes films about things that he likes or cares about.
Good evening. The South African government has banned Sir Richard Attenborough's film Cry Freedom, just hours after the South African censors approved it and released it uncut.
5 years after Gandhi, Dickie made Cry Freedom and proved again that he could win audiences with a political subject close to his heart. But it made him and his wife Sheila unwelcome guests in South Africa.
3 cinemas where it was being shown. No one was injured.
We were naive enough to believe that we were not, in fact, spotted. And, of course, we were, as we subsequently learnt, spotted all the time. Eventually, we went to see Winnie Mandela. And you were not allowed, only two people are allowed to meet, and so I had to meet her. Sheila stayed outside the township house that they were in, and so on. And Winnie gave an interview to the SABC, South African Broadcasting Corporation. And when Sheila went in to talk to Winnie, I came out, and the SABC, who had given this interview, who had been granted this interview, asked me. And I thought, well, if Winnie's done it, why can't I? I gave a rather bland interview, etc. This interview was totally distorted. And when I said something like, we hope to start shooting, meaning the movie, this was placed in juxtaposition as if with Winnie Mandela I was planning an uprising. And on SABC that night, they were heading the news. Forget what else was going on in the world. First 10 minutes of the news was a total attack on the fact that I'd sneaked into the country, that I was planning this subversion, etc., etc., etc. This is the sort of person we do not wish in our country. He should leave at once. The government should do this, etc., etc. We flew back to the friends we were staying with in Johannesburg, and they were unequivocal. You must get out, because they could do you up, you know. They're ruthless, these devils. And God knows they could do anything to you. And so we decided to fly out ahead of our schedule. And we had black cars all the way around the house. There were black cars when we met Winnie. And then the black cars bumped us on the way and drove past us, you know, on the way to the airport. It was one of the most uncomfortable few days that I ever remember, and I've never been more delighted to get on what was then a BOAC aircraft. Oh, it was very unpleasant.
I think that you will find down the line many young directors who have been greatly inspired by Richard's work. He has given tremendous inspiration to Steven Spielberg and gave Steven the clarity of thought and courage to bring his masterpiece to light, Schindler's List, in which he had an emotional investment equal to and as fine as Richard's.
After Gandhi picked up its Oscars and had that tremendous success, there was a tremendous feeling of optimism around, which was unrealised. It took the best part of another 10 years before things really started happening. But at the same time, you know, looking back, 10 years is not such a long period of time. Maybe Gandhi was sowing the seeds for the kind of film industry that we've got now.
The story of Dickie Attenborough's part in reviving the British movie industry, together with his plans for 2 more epic films, will be told by Barry Norman and other illustrious movie watchers in Part 4 of My Life in Film next week. We reach the final part of My Life in Film, the cinema biography of Richard Attenborough, and we bring the story up to date with a look at Dickie's work in support of the British film industry, together with the new film he's directing and the one in which he plays John Hammond, the man who dreams of dinosaurs roaming wild in Steven Spielberg's blockbuster sequel to Jurassic Park, The Lost World.
Well, hello there. What are you? A little bird or something? Mummy! Daddy, you've got to come see this! I found something!
find a way, as you once so eloquently put it. And by now we have a complete ecological system on the island with dozens of species living in their own social groups without fences, without boundaries, without constraining technology. And for 4 years, I've tried to keep it safe from human interference.
Well, that's right. I mean, hopefully you've kept this island quarantined and contained, but I'm in shock about all this.
I've organized an expedition to go in and document them, to make the most spectacular living fossil record the world's ever seen.
Go in and document? What do you mean, like with people?
Yes. The animals won't even know they're there. Very low impact, strictly observation and documentation. Don't worry, Ian. I'm not making the same mistakes again.
No, you're making all new ones.
Hammond has a touch of the madness of the eccentric in his character. He's a dreamer. He's not unlike Mr. Spielberg to a certain extent, in that he is fascinated by the infinite capabilities of human endeavor.
Well, like John Hammond, Dickie himself is, I think, fascinated by the infinite capabilities of human endeavour.
Film critic and author of a book about Dickie Attenborough, Andy Dugan.
And ironically, his own next film is about the preservation of a wilderness and centres on a dreamer and an idealist, a real character, an early environmentalist from Canada called Grey Owl.
Grey Owl is an extraordinary story in that it took place in the 1930s as far as we were concerned. I had totally forgotten about it until my business partner, Diana Hawkins, saw an anniversary of his death, I suppose, when she was waiting in a dentist's waiting room with a magazine, and said, "I've seen this incredible story, Dick. Do you know anything about it?" And I couldn't believe that I'd not thought of it as a movie before, because it has everything for the cinema. It has drama, it has humour, it has sentiment, it has a landscape and an image which is quite extraordinary, the vast, vast wilds of northern Canada and the lakes of northern Canada. And it is about a man, and I prefer doing biography to anything else, it is about a man who changed our attitudes, who in the 1930s was advocating the concerns in relation to our environment, which virtually nobody else had paid any attention to. Certainly nobody who became a celebrity. He became this incredible sort of movie star figure. And he arrived in England in his buckskins and his Indian feathers and so on. And it's the most touching, it's the most surprising story. And I suppose there's no harm at this juncture in declaring the denouement. This man who became this huge cult figure, who was actually invited by the Royal Society, by the King and Queen and the two princesses. He went to Buckingham Palace to lecture to them. Finally was discovered to be a total phony. He was a liar, he was a drunk, he was a bigamist 4 times over, and his name wasn't Grey Owl at all. It was Archie Ballaney, and he came from Hastings.
He'd never tackled a subject that had anything to do with environmentalism. I knew he'd be intrigued by this idea of somebody who lived a lie and got trapped in it.
Dickie's business partner, Diana Hawkins.
And so, rather like Chaplin, I went away and wrote a short treatment and brought it to show him. And the hook was, in a way, totally unexpected, because it turned out that he and his brother David, as boys, had queued up to hear this man lecture in Leicester. And he rang David immediately and said, did he remember him, and was Grey Owl important as far as environmental concerns were concerned? And David said, absolutely he was. He was the first person to stand up and say, look, we can't go on doing this. And that was the start of it.
The heartbreaking thing is that my brother David says that if, in fact, he had not been uncovered, as it were, the whole case for the environment might have been considerably further advanced. In other words, the message died with the messenger. I mean, because the messenger was decried and denounced and so on, nobody, and there weren't all that number of people who cared all that much, nobody paid any attention to what he had to say. I mean, he saved the Canadian beaver single-handed. There's no question about that whatsoever, and began the whole campaign to save the Canadian forests.
Grey owl is not an easy idea to finance in Hollywood. The environment is not high on film financiers' agenda. The only form of insurance they have is stars. They know that if there's a certain A-list star in a picture, regardless of the fact that their fee may be $28 million per picture, that is their insurance. That's how they sell it in countries as diverse as Korea, Japan, Italy, Scandinavia. And so the only way to get this picture financed was to have a star in the leading part.
Pierce Brosnan has now been signed to play Grey Owl in the film.
He's romantic, he's athletic, there's a certain air of mystery, of containment about him. I can't think of anybody who would be better for this particular part.
Dickie's search for the finance for his films, including this one, has taken him many times to the United States. He's one of a long procession of British filmmakers who've had to go there cap in hand to the Hollywood studios and say, please, sir, can we have some more to make our films? And that's obviously something that no British filmmaker is happy about, and it's the result of a long-term malaise in the British film industry, which Dickie, along with others, have been trying for many years to correct.
There is not the sort of money that I require for my big biographical pictures available in the UK. There might have been if another attitude had been taken as far as the Rank Group is concerned. When Uncle Arthur first set up the Rank Group and all that was to happen with the Rank Group, I'm sure he had the hopes that one day Rank would be as big and as important as any film production distribution company in the world. It has not happened. Rank, over the last X years, has been pathetic. And it is our one chance, because they had the distribution where the money is, they had the theatres where the money is, and they really didn't, despite all their statements, put money in sufficient amounts up for indigenous production.
What we did was to allow our studios and all those wonderful craftsmen all go onto the building sites and be made redundant.
Dickie's former partner at Allied Films, the writer and director, Brian Forbes.
I was forced to close MGM studios when I was managing director over my dead body, and one of the reasons why I resigned, because I felt it was so short-sighted. The studio that I ran was then sold and cynically knocked down and became like a heap of rubble, became a bomb site. Now they're having to build studios, which I always contended they would have to. MGM Boreham Wood was the best post-war studio which had been built. That became a rank Xerox warehouse. Very sad.
The closure of the studios is all the more tragic because in the immediate years after the war, there was a film boom in Britain where we were making films which were unapologetically British. We weren't making films pretending to be American. We had directors like Tony Richardson, like John Schlesinger. They were making movies, Look Back in Anger, Billy Liar. These were genuinely British films, and it really was no more than a blip, but a wonderful, magical blip in terms of the British film industry, and it's a great shame that that was nipped in the bud.
And the tragedy that occurred, of course, was that we were tempted, because of the success we were finding in America, to believe that the real way in which we would conquer America was to embrace America. And we were persuaded, I say we, the financiers and distributors, were persuaded into even taking second-grade American names and putting them into movies here. And everything, all the dialogue, they won't understand that in Saskatchewan, you know, so you have to change this line. This won't dramatically, they won't understand this or that. And we robbed our cinema of the very thing that was the jewel which found its success throughout the world in its indigenous and honest portrayal of things that we did understand. It was an absolute tragedy. It was done for the best intentions, and it was one of the most terrible misjudgments that resulted for quite a number of years in the slow descent from really a very high point of the quality and success of British cinema.
There was a period in the last 15 years, or I would say certainly from 1980 to 1993, 94, where the level of disinterest in government was absolute. I mean, they had no interest whatsoever in the industry. It's revived a little in the last couple of years of the major government, but throughout the Thatcher years it was a pathetic situation.
Britain's best-known movie producer, David, now Lord Putnam.
I personally, and Dickie as well, dealt with 17 different ministers for film in 18 years. I mean, that in itself, I think, is an incredible condemnation of the amount of interest they showed. And it was Dick's enthusiasm and that really kept things at all alive. It was thanks to him that we got our morning with Margaret Thatcher, which was illuminating. And sadly, in one sense, she was gone before she could have done anything about it. And I think she was genuinely impressed by the argument making, and she certainly realised how hopelessly misinformed she'd been by her own advisors and ministers. So, yes, I think Dickie's pushing and pushing and pushing, and Dickie's profile were essential during those years to keep film on the agenda. He has an enormously affectionate place in British national life. I've no doubt about that at all. I've witnessed it. I mean, he was an enormously helpful part of the Labour push in the run up to the election, because once he hit the road, you got media space and column inches.
At the last election, he was kind enough to agree to come and speak at my final rally. And that really is quite an event in Coatbridge and Christie.
Tom Clarke MP, the new Minister for Film.
He came up to the constituency, made people feel comfortable in his presence, and that was great. And then we went to the big rally, and one of the things we do is to present the original photographs to people who appear in our election literature, you know, like nurses and teachers and young unemployed people and so on. And Dickie presented those, and he was really quite moved. All the more so because at the end of his presentation, he didn't know this was going to happen, but one of our constituents who was wearing his miner's gear came into the hall and presented Dickie with a very, very nice miner's lamp. And I think Dickie was very genuinely moved. And there was a very easy link between the audience and himself. And not to my surprise, he got a standing ovation. He's got a lot of gifts, and there are lots of things which come naturally from Richard Attenborough. And certainly there are very few people who can do things and relate with people from all backgrounds as easily as Richard does.
He has limitless charm. He can charm the birds out of the trees, as they say.
Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Whenever I meet him, I'm always taken in by him. And I don't mean he's a con man, I don't mean in that sense, but I'm always charmed by him. He gives you his full attention, which is a great trick. He could have been a wonderful politician. They say of President Bill Clinton, that's his great power, is his ability to listen and give you the full attention. I had a great honour of meeting President Clinton once, and he made you feel the most important person in the room. You know, he just talks and listens, and Attenborough's got that same quality. Laurence Olivier had the same. Makes you feel that there is no one else in the world and that he's been looking all his life for you for those 5 minutes of talk. And Attenborough has that gift. It's a great gift. People would dismiss it with a sneer. Say, yeah, well, what does that mean, dear? You know, that the brigade, the awkward squad, I suppose I call them. But it's a genuine gift. It's not a gift of insincerity. I think it is a genuine gift.
Cut, take 5, everybody. You were wonderful, marvellous, lovely, darling. Mwah, mwah. Tell me, how did the advert for British Wool go?
Oh, you know, Dickie, they wanted me to play another bloody sheep.
Oh, never mind, Ducky.
I suppose the only downside to the Lord Attenborough phenomenon is that he sometimes has this sort of spitting image parody of himself paraded in front of him, which is that he can burst into tears on spec.
Lovies, darlings, it gives me great pleasure.
The truth is he does burst into tears on spec because he cares so much about things. And behind that slightly sort of actually lovey appearance lies one of the sharpest brains in British politics.
Director of the British Film Institute, Wilf Stevenson.
I know because he was my chairman for about 7 years, and he was absolutely terrific. He had a sure and certain grasp of the whole procedural basis of how an organisation like the BFI works. He understood the way in which the bureaucracy had to be organised and managed. And he used it in a way to create terrific cultural impact. I mean, he's an extraordinary character, combining detailed knowledge of his subject with a real understanding of the business processes. He's a very successful investor in a number of different projects, and the way in which the industry's got to be managed and operated. He is unique.
I think he's got very, very good political instincts and judgment. I think he knows when to strike, when it's the right time. And I think he sensed during the election campaign, when he spent a lot of time with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and other people who were to be ministers, campaigning very hard. But I think he sensed that the moment had come for the tax break that the industry had been crying out to receive for so long. Now, he knows people at the highest level. He met with a very, very large number of people after the election and before the budget. And I think it would have been much more difficult to get that tax relief which film got, and which was overwhelmingly welcomed by everybody in the film industry. I think without Richard's efforts, it may not have been possible.
The landscape has undoubtedly altered for British filmmakers, and not just because of these tax breaks that came in the budget. Hand in hand with that comes the award of lottery-financed franchises to 3 franchise holders, and that gives the industry, I think, a bit more stability. It gives people the opportunity to build a career in the British film industry, and hopefully it gives us the chance to build that kind of studio system that people like Dickie Attenborough and John Mills grew up in.
Those 3 consortia could become, if they stick together, could become big enough and powerful enough to replicate what the studios like Ealing, when Michael Balcon was making films there, Pinewood when Rank was making films there, Elstree when ABC and various other people were making films there, they could replicate that. They could give the industry the centre that it has lacked for a very long time and very desperately needs, I think.
Britain's favourite movie presenter, Barry Norman. Film was a Just Radio production.
This is Richard Allenson. Hello.
It is absolutely wonderful. It is wedged full with the most extraordinary characters. I mean, from the obvious characters of Jefferson and Franklin and the Adams brothers and, of course, Washington. And then across in France with Marat and Danton, Robespierre and so on. But also phenomenal secondary characters. Marguerite de Bonville, who we had an affair with in France, who bore his son and so on. And together, my passion for what he stood for, my convictions that his credo, which is what we now are attempting 200 years later to achieve, the universal suffrage, national health care, universal education, the end of slavery, and so all these things that we are still trying to put in place, he stood for. And when that's done, and I'm happy to fall off the twig.
It's a big, big project at a highly significant cost. I happen to think that 5 years from now, certainly just maybe at the millennium, the other side of the millennium, it might be just the kind of project they'll be looking for. And it probably doesn't resonate with the powers that be in Hollywood at present.
They're likely to say, you have to be you are a raving lunatic. You want to tell the story of the American War of Independence and the French Revolution, and you want to tell it within 3.5 hours, and you expect us to put up $60-70 million. Go away, young man. And I won't.
You can call me Pinky if you like. That's what my friends call me.